Okay, Mr. Grabowski, we're live.
Thank you. I'd like to call the March 7th, 2023 meeting of the Audit and Finance Committee to order. I guess the first item is the adoption of the agenda. Are there any changes that we need to be aware of the agenda? Hearing none, I'd like a motion to approve the agenda as posted.
I make a motion to approve the agenda as posted.
Do I have a second?
Second.
The motion is passed and the agenda is agreed upon as posted. I'm assuming that everybody's had a chance to look at the minutes from the last meeting, which have been posted for review. I'd like to have a motion to have approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Vote.
Aye.
Aye.
The approval of minutes are approved as written. First item up for discussion is an action item. It's a motion to approve the reallocation of funds as shown on the attached resolution. And I think for presentation, we have Jasmine Shaw, the Executive Director of Capital Programs.
Thank you, Mr. Grabowski. The proposed realignment of long-term debt project budgets will allow the opportunity to fully fund the Rosenblum co-architect contract for Morningside Middle School. The remaining realignment of the projects will have sufficient funding for AC Cochran as well as Deer Park. That's all I have for this particular item.
Are there any questions from the committee on this item?
Just in general, what's happening? Because it's obviously a big change in the budget, but just what's happening at Morningside?
So this will allow us to fully fund the contract for the architect. We are using long-term debt funding as well as phase 4 funding, and we did not have enough money on the line item for long-term debt in order to fully fund his contract. And so this will allow us to fully fund all of the total funding to allow the architect to move forward for designing the 900 student middle school there.
And what about the money that was approved for Corcoran and Deer Park? What money was that going to go for, and what's not happening now?
So it's still staying at AC Cochran and Deer Park. It's just shifting up to Morningside. We're not asking for additional funding. It's the same funding. We're just moving it around, moving some of it from AC Cochran and Deer Park up to Morningside.
Right, but I presume that the money in the original budget for those schools was meant to do something at those schools.
Oh yeah, so at AC Cochran and Deer Park, we're doing surveying at this time. They're smaller projects, not as large as Morningside. And so at this part of the project, we're in the surveying stages, which will be adequate for what we need the money for at this time.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm basically, as I see it, the savings that you have under the proposed budgets are just basically being moved up to Morningside.
That is correct.
Any further questions? And then correct me if I'm wrong in stating this, I would move to have this motion to approve the reallocation of funds as shown on the attached resolution passed on to the board at the next board meeting for consideration. Do I have a second?
Second.
Have a vote.
Aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. So we will move on to action item number 2, which is the motion to approve the reallocation of funds as shown as the attached resolution. And I understand we have Jeff Bowery, the Chief Operating Officer, will be presenting this. Mr. Bowery.
Thank you, Mr. Grabowski. So this is a reallocation of funds from contingency to facility maintenance and to media center. If you recall back in January, we moved some of the contingency as we near the end of the fiscal year. And we want to sign that funding that we had set aside in the event of a emerging issue. We did move some of that money in January. We want to continue to move some of that money as we near the end of the fiscal year again. So we're proposing the distribution as shown on the resolution.
Do I have any questions from the committee? I think, Mr. Bowery, my concern with this is that it appears that we're digging into our program contingency pretty heavily, with a remaining balance, as I see it, is about $133,000, and that's supposed to cover the next 4 months of any potential variances.
Yes, sir. I feel very comfortable that we're setting ourselves up with having enough remaining in that contingency to get to the end of the fiscal year.
Great news. Wouldn't expect anything less. Any further questions or discussions? Hearing none, I would like to make a motion to move this motion to approve the reallocation of funds as shown on the attached resolution. I guess this is 2B, on to the board for consideration at the board meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Vote, please.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes, and we move on to item 2C, which is a motion to approve the reallocation of funds and to add a new project that was not on the original board approval of phase 5, 6-year capital maintenance plan as shown on the attached resolution. And for this, we have Stephen Hammer, the Associate of Facilities Management. Mr. Hammer.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. This proposed reallocation of funding within our capital maintenance plan is due to some savings that we have in our Minnie Hughes Elementary School HVAC project. That project was completed with ARP funding, as well as some savings from Daniel Jenkins HVAC project and Deer Park Middle School environmental exterior envelope project. Both of those had bids that came in lower, and we're going to be able to execute those projects for less money that was in the budget. We also have some savings from the Moultrie Middle School lighting and the C.E. Williams North paving projects. Those requirements went away. They were in their original plan, but our engineers have determined, and my staff have determined, that we don't need to execute those projects just yet. So those savings, we wanted to distribute it among other projects that are in our sales tax plan and add one new project, which is lighting at the Garrett School there. This is interior lighting that supports our emergency lighting plan that's within the school. So again, in summary, this identifies some savings through some either some funding that was outside of our sales tax program to accomplish the projects, or some savings from some bids that came in lower than budgeted and redistributing among the other projects. Just one other point, the reason that we're redistributing among the other projects is that these other projects had additional funding needs. Some of these budgets are coming in, or these budgets are coming in a little bit higher. And so these savings will help us to complete these projects without having to adjust the plan scope for that. Pending your questions, this is the resolution that we proposed.
Have any questions from the committee? I think the only question I have is like on the Moultrie and the C.E. Williams projects, the engineers do not seem to feel that this is needed just yet. Is there a time frame that we may be looking at in the near future, or is this?
Yes, sir.
One's a paving issue and the other is a lighting issue.
Well, the Moultrie lighting, what we may come back to, the C. Williams North paving, is really going to be overcome by the fact that we are actually going to be building a new school there. And so maybe I misspoke, that requirement has just gone away. The multi-lighting is one that we have a little bit more flexibility on the execution, but the actual requirement for the C1 North pavement is probably going to be an enduring or a requirement that won't have an enduring need at all.
Thank you very much. That clarification. Do I hear any more questions? Hearing none, I would like to move action item 2C, the motion to approve reallocation of funds to add new projects that was not on the original board approval 5-6-year capital maintenance plan as shown on the attached resolution onto the board for consideration at the next board meeting. I'd like to file that motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Can we please vote?
Aye.
Hearing all ayes, it passes unanimously, and we move on to agenda item D, 2D, which is board approval of the procurement workshop. And I do not have listed who's presenting. Dr. Kenneth D, can you please advise us is this Miss Carlin?
Yes.
I think, Mr. Grabowski, that's the next item is the approval of the projects greater than 250,000 on the.
Right,
agenda.
that's correct. That's correct.
Okay, all right. Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, Audit and Finance Committee members. This is a list of the upcoming projects that are going to be greater than $250,000 through March 7th. There are 6 projects totaling $4.4 million and are listed in detail.
Do I have any questions from the committee? These all appear to be capital project items as I look at it.
Yes, sir.
All seem deemed to be appropriate as I see it. Do you have any further questions? Hearing none, I'd like to move item C D on the motion to approve projects on the attached list of approval of projects greater than 250,000 to the board for consideration. Do I have a second?
Second.
Can we please vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. We move on to item,
Just a minute, Mr. Grabowski. Just a minute, Mr. Grabowski. We have a comment and a recommendation we want to talk about on these 250 items. Jeff?
Yes, sir. So Mr. Grabowski, just a thought for the future here. These projects are necessary or critical to summer work. 2 of them are indeed for the capital construction program. 4 of them are summer projects that are necessary to be done. What we're recommending is that we bring these to a special called meeting next Monday after the committee of the whole for approval. That'll give us an extra 2 weeks to execute them. We would normally have to wait until the end of the month. This is something that we typically experience as we enter the summer months, the urgent need to begin projects. So that's a recommendation that we have for you as the chair.
it's a busy day. I'm assuming this is going to take what, 5 minutes?
It'll be quick. Yes, sir.
And we would basically, because I know on the committee of the whole, we have an executive session. Then we have the committee of the whole. So are you talking about in between the executive session, the committee whole, or after following the committee of the whole?
Following the committee of the whole, sir, it'll go through the committee of the whole like it normally does. And there is a special called meeting that is already set up. Right now, we would simply add this as an agenda item, and it would be something that we believe could be handled in short order.
Got it. Do I need to do any, do we need to make a motion to approve that, or is this all set up and all go?
No, sir. You would not need a motion here in Audit and Finance.
Excellent. So I'll just advise everybody at Cal that this is happening.
Yes, sir.
And they'll be posted, so they'll have adequate notice anyway.
Correct.
Excellent. Okay. Sounds good. Moving on. We are at item 2, A, B, C, B, D, D, E, which is an action item. And the recommendation is a motion to approve the contract of Elliott Davis to perform the final agreed upon procedures for the 2017-2022 capital projects phase 4. And Ms. Carlin, I understand this is yours for
Yes.
discussion.
Thank you, sir. The Master Capital Program for years 2017 to 2022 has generated approximately $691 million in sales tax revenue. We are approaching the final completion of this building program. The Citizens Oversight Steering Committee for this particular building program, along with its chair, Michael Hallis, proposed, and staff does concur, that an analysis of the efficiencies and effectiveness of the program and its execution should be conducted. A similar analysis was conducted midway through this program and no exceptions were found. It is our intention to engage with the accounting firm Elliott Davis to audit our agreed upon procedures. These services will be procured via CCSD Procurement Code exemption 710.1.6, also known as Policy and Legal Services. The fee is $42,000 and the funding source is sales tax proceeds.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee?
So under that exemption, does it, I know you're wanting to approve the contract to Elliott Davis, but under that exemption, does it require any other actions as far as multiple, receiving multiple suppliers, or how did you come upon Elliott Davis to contract with?
So Elliott Davis has audited multiple capital programs along with our our agreed upon procedures. They've also done other audits. They're very familiar with how the school district, the school district's operations and procedures overall. So because they did our mid-year building program audit, we were recommending to bring them back for this final building program audit.
I just have a question in following up with that. What is actually the exemption 710.1.6? Is that like a sole source?
No, sir, and I don't have the information with me at this meeting, but it is a procurement code that allows school districts or entities to exempt legal services as well as auditing services.
I think it's exempting it from competition, right?
Yes, I'm sorry, that was a very important word. Yes, it's exempting it from competition.
Is there any set amount on that? I mean, any upper limits or lower limits on that?
This is Don. So I don't think there are any upper limits on this exemption in the code. And so typically what happens with our financial services and audit contracts that we have. So when we have our audit firm that performs our annual audit and issues the financial statements each year, every 5 or 6 years or so, when we go out, when we decide to take a look at potentially getting competing, we do compete those firms. This particular firm here, as Jackie has indicated, they have for several years now, and I think it's twice during the life of each 5 or 6 year capital program, that we have established a set of agreed upon procedures that they come in every 3 years or so, 3 or 4 years or so, and perform this particular service audit for us. And so we exempt them. This is one firm that we exempt, and I don't know what the dollar amount is, but it's not. How much is it? 42,000.
42,000, yeah.
Yeah, so it's very within in the reasonable scope of the audits that we pay for various reasons.
Excellent. Do you have any further questions from the committee? Hearing none, I move to for a motion to have this motion to approve the contract of Elliott Davis to perform the final agreed upon procedures for the 2017-22 capital program moved on to the board for further consideration. Do I have a second?
Second.
Please vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously and is passed on to the board. Okay, where are we? Now we come to the fun items. So we're done with all the action items. If I'm correct, we're on to section 3, the information items. And the first one is point A for the year 21, fiscal year 22 procurement agreed upon procedures, AUP audit reports. And who will be, I don't see anybody listed down as, Miss Carlin.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
You're the originator, so I'm assuming you're the one who's presenting this.
Well, actually, I'm going to turn this over to Emily Sobczak with Green Fitty and Colley, and she will give out the report on this audit.
Good afternoon. Again, I'm Emily Sobczak. I'm with Green Fitty Colley, and we perform the district's financial statement audit, but we also perform the agreed upon procedures which are required by the state that cover the procurement division. And so these procedures differ a little bit. When it comes to an agreed upon procedures engagement, it differs from an audit in that during the financial statement audit, we as your auditors determine what procedures are performed. With an agreed upon procedures engagement, you tell us what procedures you'd like us to perform. And with this particular procurement agreed upon procedures engagement, the procedures that we're performing are actually dictated by the state. So the state's Division of Procurement Services requires all school districts with budgets in excess of 75 million to have these agreed upon procedures done at least every 3 years. Typically, they're done annually, but for fiscal 21, the district requested that we defer those procedures and do them in conjunction with fiscal 22. So this agreed upon procedures report covers the 2-year period ended June 30th, 2022. One great thing about an agreed upon procedures report is that it does list out all of the procedures that we performed and includes the results related to each procedure. So you can review that report and see what we did. Again, these are procedures that the state has us perform. They cover all areas of procurement. So we look at the purchase orders, we look at the bidding processes, we look at procurement cards. We also look at some areas that the district actually has designated to outside of the district's procurement services. So areas like surplus that are handled by the facilities management office. The state still wants us to look at those procedures as they consider them to be related to procurement. So in our procedures that we performed for fiscal 21 and 22, we did have 2 findings that are identified in the report. The first is related to the district's procurement code requires that the facilities management office submits semi-annual reports for any trade-ins, and those reports were not being done. That was just an oversight, but that finding has been remediated, and our understanding is that those reports are now being performed properly in accordance with the code. The second finding that we had was related to procurements with minority-owned businesses. The district misinterpreted the code and was doing some direct negotiations with those businesses. The district identified that was not fully in compliance with the code. And so before we even began our procedures, the district had identified that error and was in the process of correcting those those procurements that were not properly performed. I'm happy to answer any questions that y'all have related to the procedures that we performed or any of our results.
Yeah, Emily, this is Kent. I was trying to understand, and I apologize for not totally following it in the materials, but the corrective action, does it simply require going back and getting different documentation that would allow those contracts to have been directly negotiated the way they were, or does it mean that those contracts truly needed to go back to a competitive bid process and you really can't undo that at that point?
Well, likely some of both. And I think that in the next topic that's going to be covered, the next agenda item, I believe you'll be hearing more about the district's analysis of those contracts.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I could just for clarification and for the committee's benefit, I was kind of confused as to why this seemed to be a lead in to the next item. Am I correct?
They are, yes, they are two similar. So again, we performed the procedures that are required by the state, but then because the district had identified that that they had improperly procured certain contracts by doing these direct negotiations, the district had another firm come in and perform some more extensive procedures directly related to those direct negotiations.
So the first one was required by the state, which we're talking about right now.
That's right. And so the procedures that we performed were broader. They were over the procurement division as a whole. Whereas in the next agenda item, you'll hear about some more focused procedures that were done as a direct result of this error that was identified.
And can someone describe then sort of what's the upshot of this in terms of the work that's now being done? What is the result of all this going to be?
So this is Don. And so I don't know for the board, for the committee members that have been here for a while, not the new members. If you recall, back in 2021, I think it was, when we had the we commissioned the disparity study. There was discussion amongst the committee about whether or not we should expand the percentages of the goals for minority and women-owned firms. At that time, I said, well, we don't have a basis for making a different, setting a different goal. And we proposed that the district go through what's called a disparity study. And so that was commissioned and done sometime, I think Jackie has the dates, but it was probably towards the end of calendar year 20, beginning of calendar year 21. And so that firm came in and they've begun doing the review, the disparity study review. And during that process, they identified this problem of direct award of contracts in violation of the Procurement Code 5230. So at that time, we had that firm brief the Audit and Finance Committee, I believe, briefed the board, and briefed the board officers. We took several actions at that time. One action that the school board took was to require all contracts greater than $250,000 before they were awarded to come through the Audit and Finance Committee and then get approved by the board. So that's why we have the $250,000 contracts. Prior to that, I don't remember the year off the top of my head, around FY 16 or so. Prior to FY 16 or thereabouts, their contracts used to come to the school board. The dollar threshold was nowhere near the 250. I think it was probably closer to 50,000, but we can check that. And so there was a period of time where no contracts came to the board. And so that was changed as a result of the disparity study, before the disparity study was completed. And also before the disparity study was completed, we reached out to two state agencies about this 5230 violation. One was the State Procurement Office and one with the State Department of Education. And based on that, we engaged with an outside legal firm and with one of their attorneys who was an expert in state procurement code. And he advised the board, and he presented to the board as well as staff and to the committee here, if I recall correctly, the process that we need to go through. So for contracts that had already been awarded under the that were direct awards that should have not been, the process that we had to go through by the requirements of the procurement code was to ratify those contracts. And so any contract that had to be ratified by the school board was, I think we had three categories. So one category had to be ratified by the school board. We did that. One category could be ratified, I think, by the CFO and the superintendent. And I don't remember what the thresholds were. We can go back and look at that. And then there was another category that did not have to be, well, it didn't have to be ratified because contracts hadn't been issued. So we had to stop the issuance of those contracts. We were in the process of awarding contracts. The contracts had not been awarded. And so we stopped that and went back through the approved procurement code process of awarding contracts. So at that point, the disparity study firm continued to do continued their work with the disparity study. And then some point last year, they issued a report that we posted to our website, and they briefed this committee. I can't remember whether they briefed the board or not. And then based on the findings of the firm that did the disparity study, and then we told the Audit and Finance Committee, I think the board too, that we would contract with a completely different audit firm, and this is Smallman and Jenkins is here to present today, for them to take a look at not only 5230, but look at our procedures in procurement. So that's what they have done, and they're here to present the results of that work. And that work came about because of the disparity study that we entered into and the findings that came there. But in terms of what we need to do with the contracts that were awarded inappropriately, that's been handled already. And so the next steps are to deal with the procedures that we need to put in place to make sure that in the moving forward that we are in complete compliance with the entire procurement code. And that's what you're here this afternoon from Malden and Jenkins.
Great. Thanks, Tom. Very helpful.
So the MBE plan, based on your report, are you saying that the school district met the goal of $92 million under its MBE utilization plan? Is that what this finding is saying?
No, the finding is not related to the MBE plan. The MBE plan for 2021, let's see. So for 2021, the percentage committed to the MBE plan was 46%,
right.
And in 2022 is 33%. Those were the results for the year. The finding that is included in the report is related to the direct negotiations. It wasn't related to not meeting a plan goal. It was related to how some of those contracts were procured, that proper competition was not always sought.
Now, I guess I'm going back to the procedure for your MBE utilization plan, where you tested to ensure that the annual plans were submitted timely and approved by the school district, determined that periodic progress reports were filed timely, and then compare the goals versus the results. So I guess my question is, the goal was say for 2021, the goal was 121 million, if I'm reading this correctly. And my question is, did we meet that goal of 121 million?
So maybe the wording of that, of those results is not very clear because the 121 million is the actual, that was the actual amount committed, and not the goal, I believe. And Jackie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the goal is 10%. The 10% is the goal in the standard state procurement code. And so y'all would have exceeded that goal.
And so without looking at the numbers, I think you're talking about FY21. So at some point prior to FY21, we had MBE goals, SWMB goals that exceeded 10%. I think it was like 20%. So that was the goal, was 20%. As I stated a few minutes ago, at some point, the Audit and Finance Committee said, well, if you can meet 20%, why not go? So we exceeded that 20%. And so the question to me was, if you can exceed the goal of 20%, why not make a goal of 30%? I said, well, I don't know how to base that. I don't know whether or not there's capacity within the in the area for firms to do that level of work, or if there's capacity and we're simply not tapping into it. And that's where we initiated the disparity study and found out that, yes, in fact, we were exceeding our goal, but I was exceeding it in part because of the direct negotiations, which we should not have been doing. And so since then, based on that, we have subsequently adjusted our goals to be in line with the state goal of 10%. I think it's 10%. So that I mean that's you know where the goal was, where the goal is now, and in terms of the actual dollar amounts for fiscal year 21, I just don't have those numbers in my head, so I can't respond to that. We can find out for the committee, but I just don't have those in my head.
Yeah, because I'm obviously reading this totally different from what you're all saying. It would appear to me that we had 260 on this wording, 264 that was part of the MBE plan, and 121% was a result of the direct, the infraction upon the procurement code of direct negotiations. But I guess that's covered more fully in the next report. So the wording of this is kind of confusing.
Right. So the 264 is the total, the 264 million is the total expenditures. Okay. And 46% for 2021, 46% was committed to minority owned businesses.
And that'd be the 121.
Correct.
For fiscal year 2020. Excellent. Thank you. And correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of these findings in your report are just are listed in the Malden Jenkins just a little more in depth, because they seem to be pretty similar.
I believe some of them, yes. I don't, and they can speak to the procedures that they perform, but my understanding is that their procedures were more focused, whereas our procedures looked at the procurement division as a whole. They looked at certain types of procurements.
Because I see you have no findings on the use of P cards throughout the procurement system, but then again, when we look back through the next report, the use of P cards and violation of the procurement is probably pretty substantial. But I guess we'll take that up in the next report since you found no findings.
based on, yes, based on the procedures that we performed, we didn't have any findings related to procurement cards.
Yeah, but I mean, I want to renote what the auditor, Emily, said, was that her firm was working on a set of agreed upon procedures that were dictated by the state. So they didn't expand their audit to cover anything other than what that the state asked them to do.
Where can we get a copy of what the state requires and what was done? Is that posted on the state has that posted somewhere?
Yes, it's on the state procurement website.
Thank you. Have any further questions regarding the audit by Green Finley Colley? I would ask that we move on. And I'm assuming this is going to be presented to the board for, Dr. Kennedy, you can clarify this for me. At the COW, or are we taking this just directly to the board for the information purposes?
So we will, if we make a presentation, it will be at the board meeting.
Thank you. Okay, hearing no further questions or discussion, I would ask that we move on to item 3B, which is the it's listed. Malden and Jenkins procurement audit and analysis. And Ms. Kennedy, as our originator, would you please introduce this?
So I've already given the background when I responded to the last item. So with that, I'll simply introduce the auditor that's going to present, and that's David Roberts with Malden and Jenkins.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is David Roberts. I'm a partner with Malden and Jenkins and led the projects on behalf of the firm. We were engaged by CCSD to really assess the impact, or the universe, if you will, of the 5230 awards. And this presentation will briefly go over that. Certainly highlight a number of observations that we found, as well as recommendations and next steps. And obviously, certainly happy to answer any questions. So moving on into the table of contents, what we're going to talk about today is first the universe of awards, or the impact, the issues that are shown specifically to 5230, general issues, as well as thoughts from our assessment of the procurement department as a whole. So first, getting into 5230. So just, I know the superintendent set the stage a little bit, and just to add a little bit more flavor, 5230 is a section within the CCSD procurement code, which is based on the South Carolina procurement code, and certainly allows the option to work with minority vendors. And within that, those, in order to be eligible, they must meet one certification of the South Carolina Small and Minority Business Assistance Office, or known as OSMBA. And they also must be a Charleston-based firm, or I'm sorry, a South Carolina-based firm. The procurement department within the school district determined which contracts were eligible and which contracts to leverage Section 5234. And then the code lists different specific clarifications within the code in terms of the eligible criteria. From our analysis, the district leveraged the 5230 option basically from fiscal year 17 through a point in time in fiscal year 22. And I believe the superintendent alluded to that when it was recognized that there was a misinterpretation, and that program was discontinued. It was ended midway through fiscal year 22, And I think it phased out over time due to the procurement life cycle and where certain procurements were within the process related to being awarded. On the bottom of slide 3 here shows a graphic. Basically, it's the summary of the impact. So between fiscal year 17 and 22, related to Section 5230 awards, there were 109 separate unique vendors, just short of 1,700 POs that were issued, 121 million in terms of awards, and the average PO value shown around 72,000. The next slide just graphically shows the number of POs. PO stands for purchase order by year between 17 and 22, as well as the dollar value. And this just graphically shows, obviously you see a downtick due to COVID for a little bit, and then a significant uptick after that, and then discontinuance in 22. Through the universe of awards that we looked at, we specifically focused on the ones that were from fiscal year 17 through 21 when we had full complete years. We looked at 1,434 of those POs in great detail, looking at each individual purchase order within Munis, supporting documentation, all of the evidence that goes into the file within Munis. From those POs, the original total order value was 90 million. And with that, there was also 539 change orders, which were applied to those 1,434 purchase orders. The change orders resulted in a net increase of approximately 16 million, which gives a total order value of approximately 106 million. Diving into our issues or observations, we have these organized into 5 areas: vendor classification, eligibility verification, improper documentation, inconsistent evidence of quotes, and inappropriate use of change orders. So we'll go through each of those fairly succinctly. On slide 7, focusing on vendor classification. So Munis is the district's financial management system and is also leveraged for procurement activity. The system does not specifically designate a checkbox or a way of indicating whether a vendor is 5230 compliant or meets the eligibility criteria. So with that, within the system, there's roughly 15 different classifications indicating disadvantaged business status within the system. And so there certainly is some subjectivity, or was subjectivity, in terms of whether somebody was 5230 eligible and how that was documented within the procurement system, Munis. Again, with those 15 indicators that are in the system, there was no classification or combination that indicated that they were 5230 eligible. And also the vendor application process, the document allows the vendors to basically self-select in terms of their status or classification for procurement. At the time, there were no formal certification requirements requiring the maintenance of certification. So as we performed our procedures and looked at the maintenance files, and I'll speak to this in the next couple slides, the evidence of a vendor being or meeting the eligibility criteria was not always maintained within the system. Now moving on to eligibility verification. So again, Section 5230 requires certification from the OSMBA. However, since the code was adopted, the OSMBA discontinued the process of its certification responsibilities and moved those to the Small Minority Business Contracting and Certification Agency, which is also known as the SMBCC. So of the 109 vendors that we looked at that were awarded the 5230 awards during the time period of 17 through 22, only 33 vendors, or roughly 30% of them, had records on file proving the certification. 15 vendors, additional vendors, or 14% additionally, showed evidence of having certification, but issued by another certifying body other than the OSMBA or the SMBCC. 61 vendors or 56% of the vendors did not have evidence of certification maintained within the system. I'm moving to the next slide. 1,113 POs from the set of 1434 that we looked at, roughly 89.8 million. So out of the total population were awarded to vendors that did have certification. So now we're moving away from the number of POs to the dollar value. 187 POs, or approximately 9.6 million, were awarded to folks who were, or vendors who were certified by another organization other than OSMBA or SMBCC. And 134 purchase orders totaling roughly 6.6 million were awarded to vendors without any documentation within the system. So moving on to slide 11, in addition to the awards, where there was no evidence of certification, there were also instances where certification may have been maintained, but were expired. So we looked at that and we found that as an instance of occurring as well. Moving on to improper documentation. There were a couple of incidents that we noticed within the system where 5230 was cited as a rationale for procurement or a criteria for procurement, when in fact it really should have been 3230, which relates to engaging architectural firms. There's also some thoughts that we have related to BPAs, so blanket purchase agreements with local vendors. Those were used during post-hurricane repairs as a way to earmark money, and some were cited related to 5230 as well. And then also during interviews, it was cited that certain individuals or a practice was done to create limited bidding lists, so leveraging 5230 as a way to spur competition. However, we didn't necessarily see that. We saw more evidence of direct negotiation. Okay, last couple slides. There certainly was inconsistent evidence of quotes. So of the 1434 purchase orders that we examined, 90% did maintain some sort of quote or estimate. Obviously, that's what one would expect. When POs are first quoted or created, in Munis, we did note that some of the POs that we found did not have an attached quote or an attached estimate. And then sometimes when they were, some of the purchase orders did not align or did not match the vendor's initial quote or cost estimate. Moving on to slide 14, I think just a relevant point. What we're trying to communicate is that when there's not a quote, there certainly is a increased likelihood of having a change order. So one thing that we did note is that those procurements that were quoted, they had a significantly less existence of a change order compared to those that were not quoted within the system. Slide 15 related to the inappropriate use of change orders. There were 539 change orders applied to the 1434 POs. Again, that resulted in approximately $16 million to the original value, roughly an 18% increase. What we did note is approximately 1 out of 5 of the PO increases did represent a change in project scope. And additionally, we did note that change orders were used to, at times, significantly expand scope. As an example, a vendor may be engaged to do a painting job, but there may be a change order so that it's also doing something significantly different, such as roofing or HVAC. Also, there may be 1 or 2 buildings included in scope where a change order would have increased that to maybe 6 to plus buildings. All right, moving on to slide 16, general issues. So I think that Certainly the procurement department's documentation regarding vendor classification, 5230 eligibility, quoting, purchase order maintenance, certainly was frequently incomplete and occasionally inaccurate. The department did not store or maintain its documentation consistently within Munis, the system of record, which certainly cause more in-depth research to ensure that all the information is captured and that it exists. And then the last bullet here, apart from the code, which I view as an overarching framework, the department does not have any formal and standard guidance related to operationalizing the procurement process. So i.e. operational policies and procedures. Employees are relying on informal documentation, certainly being trained or coached by others, which certainly can result in inconsistent practices. As we get to slide 17, this is focused on the procurement department as a whole. We did conduct interviews with all members of the procurement department. And I think the biggest takeaway, as I alluded to on the last slide, is that the department lacks detailed policies and procedures that are used for everyday operations, that are consistent with not only the school district's code, but also the South Carolina code. And because of those lack of policies and procedures, you had the results that are shown on page 17 in terms of issues related to vendor classification, eligibility verification, documentation, quotes, use of change orders, as well as quality assurance and assessment of others' actions. As we looked into the procurement department, apart from the overarching policies and procedures, there's a lack of consistent onboarding. So when a new person is hired and brought on, that's specific to the procurement department. And there certainly is a lack of job-specific, role-specific, position-specific trainings and job aids that continue to enhance the employee and ensure standardization and consistency. There are some issues that the procurement department has with Munis. There are some things that are in its current configuration not ideal, and certainly an assessment should be done to help automate the procurement lifecycle for the district. And at the bottom of the slide, this really shows a very high level maturity model for a procurement department. Step one is really focusing on compliance. Step two is maintaining compliance, but adding it within an efficient and effective manner. And then step three is moving to that strategic partner where you're really adding value to your end users. Slide 19 shows next steps. And I want to be clear that the district has already begun implementing all of these steps as well as recommendations. So our thoughts certainly relate to developing detailed policies and procedures for the department. Once those have been adopted and trained, or there should be training provided to all staff as well as end users on the new policies and procedures. Certainly formal onboarding curriculum materials as well as job aids by position should be created. There should exist the opportunity to evaluate its current technology to help modernize its systems and ensure that the district is operating as efficient manner as possible and certainly compliant as well. And then certainly helping to understand, as we look at that maturity model again, ensuring that we have good communications between procurement and its end users, that everybody understands the new policies and procedures, and that everybody looks at the procurement department as an agency that's adding value to them, and that the procurement department is providing, excellent customer service. So I will pause there and certainly happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. This slide presentation will be available where?
It is in board docs right now.
It's in board docs. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I will open up the to the committee, the discussion. This should be interesting.
I mean, I guess I'm interested in hearing from someone on the district side. I'm not sure who Don, you want to address it, but kind of a response to the report and assessment. Any reactions?
I mean, yes, I mean, we have reacted internally to the report over the last few months that audit was being conducted. Can you hear me? Good. Yeah. Okay. And so, as I indicated earlier in this meeting, once we determined through the disparity study we were informed through the disparity study that we had an issue with 5230. That's when we decided to bring in an outside firm to make sure that that we understand the depth of the problem. And so our process then has been just that: identify the problem, figure out what steps need to take place to remedy the problem, and then execute on those problems. It's much like when we tackled the fund balance issue that we had. It's much like we tackle the issues associated when the state put the district on fiscal watch because of our lack of adherence to the timekeeping requirements. So the approach that we're taking is similar to that: identify the problems, identify what's causing the problems, and put in corrective actions.
Any reactions on how our procurement, our administration and oversight of our procurement process, how it compares to the other districts our size in the state? I guess what I'm getting at is this the the report reads that we obviously had some deficiencies, and I'm curious if this is a common pandemic problem across the state, or is this more specific to CCSD?
Well, I can't address any other place in the state. I would say that taking a look at the lack of procedures, the inadequate use of our system, and how we've gone about our interpretation of what processes out there of the procurement code, it's not consistent with good business practices, and how that relates to other districts. I don't know, Jackie, she's worked in at least one other district, so she may have some insights on that, but I would not.
And what do you think?
Maybe I'm not sure. But is Emily still on? I'm gonna say one of the audit firms may be able to weigh in on that question, that comparison.
Well, I guess maybe jumping ahead then. Two-part question. One is, do you see any ramifications from our sort of past deficiency in this area? Any consequences that will result from that? And then second, what do you think the time? Well, presuming you're going down the path that's articulated in their recommendations, what do you see as the timeline for that to become effective? Right? Like, how long do you think it'll take us to ensure we have those procedures in place, that the people are trained, and that we're operating in accordance with that recommendation?
So the person who was managing, leading the procurement department is no longer doing that. That's number one. Number two, although it wasn't shown in the recommendations here, we have contracted with this particular audit firm, Malden and Jenkins, to actually do the recommendations that you see presented, setting up the procedures, getting those documented. All those recommendations, we have contracted with them to put that in place. I don't recall the timeline that we have for that. Maybe David, you could talk through the timeline.
Yes, sir. Great question. We have a project plan. There's different milestones for meeting certain initiatives. Some as early as 2 months. Some go through 6 months. I think to answer your question, as I understood it comprehensively, I think as a whole, getting to a place where you want to be and you feel comfortable with procurement, I think 6 to 9 months in terms of establishing that level.
So it sounds like by the end of the calendar year, we should be where we want to be in this regard. What about the consequences to the district for what, how we've been over, what our oversights look like to date, and now are there going to be any consequences to this? What I mean by that is, will there be any ramifications? Do we have any out of compliance issues with either our funders or the state or any regulatory bodies that we have issues with?
Well, like I indicated earlier, that when we first discovered the issue, we did contact two departments at the state, the procurement department and the Department of Education. We walked through, their procurement folks with the Department of Education. Then we contracted with a legal firm, and we used one of their lawyers who's an expert in procurement matters for the state of South Carolina. And we took all of the appropriate actions that were recommended by that attorney, and we took those actions. And so at that point, I don't see any additional consequences at that level.
Okay, sorry. I guess I had misunderstood when you described that before, that I thought that just related to the vendor classification issue, but you brought all sort of the general topic up to those groups.
We brought the topic up to of the violation of the procurement code 5230.
5230,
Yes.
right.
So we were very specific about what we were discussing with those two departments.
Got it. Do you see any other? So the short answer is I don't think you perceive there being additional ramifications to the department, to the district, from these other elements, and to like the lack of documentation, the change orders, the change in scope on some of the change orders, things like that.
Well, I don't, but I would say this, that I relied on the advice of the attorney that was working with us to give me that level of I won't call it assurance, but the position I'm stating right now.
Okay, understood. Thanks.
Before I start, anyone else? Mr. Kennedy, I am in awe of this report and in the oversight. Who does the procurement officer report to directly?
Well, that's an interesting question. It's changed over the years. It's reported to CFO. At one point, it reported to I think the person who headed up federal programs, which was on the academic side of the house. So that it has some instability in the reporting, but currently it reports to the CFO.
When did that change?
When did what change? I'm sorry. When did
procurement start reporting? Because that seems, I would think procurement would have been under finance. So
Yeah.
I'm struggling with trying to understand how procurement would be anywhere other than under finance.
Yeah, well, I wasn't here when that change took place, so I don't know. When I came back, and I think in fiscal year 19, we moved it back under finance. But before that, it was in, like I said, federal programs, and I'm not sure how that transition took place.
So the use of 5230 started before you became CFO.
I think it started in fiscal year 16 or 17.
2017, yeah. 2017. And I think this is really directed more to Mr. Roberts. I've been struggling getting certain information, and I see under the Munis system, you've been able to get an awful lot of information to conduct this very thorough review. I noticed you've listed, or you reviewed the existing board meetings, relevant policies and procedures, and observed the relevant process workflow. So I'm assuming, Mr. Roberts, you have a pretty nice little file that has all those documents listed. So if one was to look at that, we could see all the information that was provided to the board regarding this issue.
So we do maintain work papers by professional standards. Yes, sir.
So there'd be a file that would have all the documents, because I'm kind of curious from other fellow committee members, there've been an awful lot of representations made that the board was fully aware of what was going on. And I see a 5-year period in which the procurement rules were totally violated, as laid out in this report. And so I'm really wondering at what point the board actually got involved. And Mr. Kenny, maybe you can answer that question.
I certainly can. We can get you the exact date, but again, when the firm that did the disparity study, when they first indicated that there was an issue, and that's when we first got the board involved. I don't remember the sequence, whether we briefed the board officers first or the Audit and Finance Committee first, and then the board. But it happened shortly after it was brought to our attention by the disparity study group.
And the reason I bring that up is there have been an awful lot of changes made, amendments to board policy. There have been an awful lot of changes made to the Audit and Finance Committee's charter, all during this period between 2017 to the present. And as I see it, and this is my opinion only, and I guess we'll have to review it with all the other board members, it seems like the oversight for issues like what is occurring here was pretty much removed from the board. That's why I was asking the question as to when it was brought to the board. But I'm a little more concerned, obviously, in the statement that at one point, any expenditures over 50,000 was brought to the board, and then at some point that was raised to 250. So actually, most of these violations that we're talking about were below the 250 threshold.
Well, so a couple of points on that, and certainly I can get you the exact dates, but it was around calendar year 15, calendar year 16 timeframe when procurements greater than some threshold. Again, I think the threshold is 50,000, but whatever that threshold was, it was certainly less than 250. That we stopped. The board stopped reviewing those. Now, why that is, I don't know. Again, I wasn't here in 2015, 2016 timeframe when that occurred. And so the board never reviewed any procurements until the disparity study disclosed that we had a problem with 5230. And so certainly all of the engagements with the Audit and Finance, the engagements with the Audit and Finance Committee and with the board, including the ratification of the contracts that I mentioned a few minutes ago, were done. They may have been done in executive session, but they were done in meetings, so those would be documented. And then in terms of changing policies, the only policies that I've changed since I've been here have been the fund balance policy. So I made a substantial change to that. And then we created a new financial policy, new policy in the financial section. And that was the TIF policy, which is the tax increment financing. And so those are the policies that we've changed in the finance arena since I've been here. Now, with in regards to the Audit and Finance Committee charter, I think as you're aware and everybody's aware that there's a requirement in that charter that this committee reviews the charter annually for specific changes. So any change that would have occurred in the Audit and Finance Committee charter would come through the committee per the requirement of the committee, per the requirement of the charter itself.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's why we're spending our time reviewing that charter, and especially with the help of this report, I can see why reviewing that charter is so important. And Mr. Roberts, in this report, you noted, but you didn't address that a lot of these, some of these, not a lot, some of these POs were issued to individuals who were either families or relatives employed by CCSD. Is there an ability to get a list of who all that is that you identified?
Let me go back and check our work papers and see what we have.
Thank you. The second thing is that when I look at all the numbers and I look at the dates and the use and the rise and everything, and through procurement, I'm assuming that anything dealing with ESSER 1, 2, and 3 would have gone through ESSER. Is that correct? Would that have gone through procurement? The
Yeah,
distribution?
well, anything that that required procurement action would have gone. So any funding source that we have, if it's required to go through procurement, regardless of the funding source, it would go through there. So, for instance, anything on over the $250,000 threshold that would include ESSER would come to the committee, and in procurement that we had to go enter into a contract would have to go through procurement in regards to the dollar value.
And those contracts were ratified. Those contracts were ratified once we realized that the 5230 impacted the ESSER funding, CARES Act, ESSER, and some of ESSER 2. We ratified those contracts immediately.
We have the ESSER contracts.
And I'm, and Mr. Roberts, this is really for my benefit and for the district's benefit. I have been asking since December for an itemized list of the ESSER fund distributions and the vendors. And I'm assuming, based upon reading this report and knowing the system, that it would be pretty easy and probably not that long of a time-consuming project to provide it. And I've yet to receive it. So once again, I'm going to ask Dr. Kennedy and Ms. Carlin. I really would like to see a list exactly of what vendors got this money and how much they got and who they are, and see how they fall into this interesting audit of non-compliance with the procurement. Because the amounts obviously, and that's my first request. And I just think this should be easily produced, and you could produce this within a day. And I don't understand why it's taken 3 months for me to keep asking for this document and not get it. The second thing that it's disturbing. And Mr. Kennedy, I don't know if we're going to have to do this through FOIA or whatever, look through all of the emails, but I am concerned that we have people in the district, and this is just a concern, and I don't know how we're going to look at this, that we're advising vendors to list contract prices below the 250 amount so that the board wouldn't review this. And if you can sit there and tell me that you honestly believe that never happened, I would love to hear that statement come.
Well, let me just advise you of that right now. So I don't know if it's an accusation or what, but I'm not aware of anyone who has advised vendors to violate the procurement thresholds. Again, the requirement, whatever that was before around 2016 timeframe, that stopped procurements from going to the board. I don't know what drove that, but certainly since I've been here, I'm not aware of anyone who is on staff who has advised anybody, any vendor to bring in bids below 250. And certainly,
fair enough.
And certainly the for your request through emails, it can be done, and we can determine exactly the accuracy of my statement.
Fair enough. And it's always nice getting a 32-page report with findings and recommendations. And I'm very appreciative that the district has retained the audit firm to assist them in making these changes. And as I understand one of the previous answers, you do not foresee any ramifications from the state or Department of Ed as a result of these violations of the procurement and the steps that we're actually taking to correct them. Is that correct, Mr. Kennedy?
So if we were to have some ramifications, I would have thought they would have been brought up. It would come about when we first identified this problem to the state, and when we contracted with the the outside legal firm that has the expertise in state procurement and that advised us on this.
Mr.
Well,
Kennedy, do you expect any material change in your department cost structure, either through the end of the year or maybe more likely into next year as a result of these improvements that are going to need to happen to the procurement function?
Yeah, I don't know yet. So, I mean, when the firm goes through and start developing the procedures, take a look at our in the report that was just presented to you, or at least the PowerPoint presentation, there was a concern expressed about the modernization. So if there's a technology solution to some of the issue, then there would be some cost associated with that. But I don't have a way to estimate what that would be right now. And if it were a technology upgrade or switch, I'm assuming we run that through our capital.
And Mr. Kennedy, as I understand it, in looking at the organizational chart, we have 3 vacancies at the moment. Is that hampering your ability to make these changes?
3 vacancies where, I'm sorry?
In the procurement department.
Is that right, Jackie? So Jackie is saying that is correct.
So we're in the process of looking for a director of contract and procurement, and that person would then report directly to the CFO.
That is correct. But we'll have the procedures well underway, and the process is well underway before we place somebody in there. So we'll have the training done for the existing staff, so that when we do hire a new director, that director is coming into a system that has been shored up.
And lastly, Mr. Roberts, in your report, you noted there was, based on interviews and communications, and positive collaboration between the procurement department and other district departments is low. Can you explain that?
Sure. So I think that what we noted anecdotally was that, speaking both from the procurement department staff as well as end users, there's some issues with trust, and also not having full confidence that the end users are getting efficient services and added value. And I think that, a number of the recommendations that we have and that we will be implementing certainly will move the mark on that significantly.
Excellent answer. Disturbing, but excellent as to corrective measures. Do I have any further questions from the members of the committee? Well, I thank you, Mr. Roberts, for an audit that I can actually understand. I appreciate your findings. I appreciate your recommendations. With budgets this size, I always question audits that don't have any findings or any recommendations, but that's just my experience in business and life. So I do appreciate the thorough, and it looks like the district was fully helpful in trying to resolve this issue. And Mr. Kennedy, I commend you for finding this. I do find it interesting that we do a study to find out whether we're actually giving out the proper amount of money, and the study shows that not only are we giving it out, we're giving it out without any oversight or controls. I am very concerned about the ESSER funding and that's why I'm going to ask once again that the district provides this itemized document. All the board members are asking for it. With that being said, I think we need to move on to item 3C, which is the audit and finance. Is the F21, F22 procurement agreed upon procedures. Am I correct, or am I missing one?
He's still right.
Miss Carlin, am I correct on that?
We
Seems like
should be on item C, the IT steering committee quarterly report.
Yeah, I think it's the quarterly report, right? I've got this mixed up. You're absolutely correct. It's the IT steering committee quarterly report. I apologize.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee members. So I'm here to just brief you on the information packet for the January 19th Information Technology Steering Committee meeting. We started the meeting by reporting out on our current projects and summer projects, and also details of our current security audit that we're going under with a third-party vendor. And then the committee actually engaged in a lot of dialogue back and forth, and it turned out to be a great meeting of just back and forth question and answers that is always welcomed by me and my staff. And from that, from your last comments, Mr. Grabowski, we went ahead and listed all the questions and answers of that dialogue so that you can kind of hear what's going on and what some of the committee members are recommending and asking for. So one of my biggest concerns was, are they getting the information that they need from myself and my staff in order to do, the job that they feel that they're responsible for? And all in all, they felt it was, and they asked specifically for our next meeting in April to bring our funding cycles, our budget cycles, and our planning sessions, and how we set up our projects in life cycle management. So that's what we'll be doing in April. And those are fairly brief meeting, but very informative. I'll have any questions or answer any questions if there are.
Do I have any questions from the committee? You mentioned the dialogue. Where's that posted?
So it's in the board. It's in the board docs, an attachment to the minutes.
Yes. Okay, I got it right here. Excellent. And overall, since we are involved in the budget process, based upon your committee's discussions, I would ask that you pay very close attention to what we're doing on as the district, moves through the budget, and obviously to make sure that we have enough money to budget for the upcoming 24-25 school year, as you can best, guess as to what we're going to need, knowing the state's initiatives and everything in making IT such an important element of what we use, the tool we use. I always like seeing that in the reports, noting whether we're on track or not on track, or you can foresee, future needs.
Yes, sir.
So I commend the committee for doing that. Any further questions? Then we will move on to item 3D, which is the monthly capital projects report from Ms. Costello.
Thank you, Chairman Grabowski. Afternoon to committee and Superintendent Kennedy. I'd like to present the January 2023 capital projects report. Our revenue collections for the 2017 through 2022 capital building program were 4.2 million above our 2% cash flow model projection. I also wanted to mention this is going to be the final sales tax collection for the 17-22 program. So we ended on a very high note. The next time I report, that'll be revenues for the 2023-2028 program coming shortly. The expenditures for January for the 2010 through 2016 program were 0. The expenditures for the 2017 through 2022 capital building program were $1.8 million. The expenditures for the 2023 through 2028 capital building program were $1.7 million. The 2023 through 2028 capital building program funded with long-term debt had $10,000 in expenditures. On February 27th, the board approved the BAN 2023 funding and the fixed cost of ownership 24 project list. Fixed cost of ownership fiscal year 23 program will be nearing completion in May. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Do I hear any questions from the committee? Hearing none, it's always nice, Ms. Costello, to hear that we're taking in a lot of tax revenue.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I appreciate good news. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Moving on to item 3E, the ESSER update. Ms. Carlin.
Yes, hi, thank you. This is a snapshot of how much we spent through January 31st for ESSER funds. For ESSER 2, we have spent just a little over $14 million, and we have encumbered $9.9 million. For ESSER 3, we have spent close to $38.7 million, and we have encumbered $21.8 million. We are in the final stages of modifying this actual report format with additional views, and we are trying very hard to bring that to Audit and Finance Committee in April. And this concludes the January update for ESSER funds.
Do I hear any questions from the committee?
Thank you.
So, Ms. Carlin, I still see the provisions for the principals and school leaders. We've encumbered 4.5. I take that back. Yeah. 4.5, almost $5 million. And actual to date is, so the difference remaining is 2 million. Am I reading that right?
Yes, and that is a negative number because this report does not include the most recent amendment that we filed with the State Department. So I'm sorry.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's okay. So I am under the impression that a lot of these negatives will be cleared up on the next report when we are able to apply all the additional amendments that were filed.
For the public and my fellow board members, that amendment report is now posted on the Charleston website, correct?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Well, I'll still go back and ask for that list of itemized numbers and vendors. So I'll make it again, please.
Yes, sir. I made a note of
A lot
that.
of requests from that.
Yes.
Good. Moving on to item 3F, the 90-day enrollment count. This will be by Kathleen, correct me if I'm wrong, Milne, Director of Student Information.
Yes, sir. What I've provided is a 90-day average daily membership history, and it has a comparison to the current year 45-day average daily membership. This is a different presentation than what the Audit and Finance and the board receives at 45-day and 135-day, which is classified by student waiting category. This actually shows the ADM by school. And you can see at the bottom that our total count of students decreased from the 90th day to the from the 45th day to the 90th day by 82.98. We've included a summary of the schools that had decreases of greater than 10 students. 2 of those are our North Area schools, North Area elementary schools. And then we have 3 high schools that are included in the list. 2 of those were also included last year at 90-day, which the high schools include the students that are hitting age 17, which is when compulsory education ends. So I don't think that that would be too unusual for them to have some, but we do try to prevent any kind of departure based on age like that. So we want everybody to graduate. Do you have any questions for me?
On the,
Go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead.
So on there, you listed why we had decreases, but there was a large increase at Meeting Street at 21.
Right, which is also a North Area elementary school.
All right.
So it could have been movement between those 3 campuses, Lambs, Cochran, and AC. And and
we don't know exactly where they transferred to. We just knew that those students transferred.
So Kathleen, I appreciate the additional deep dive. I know I've asked a number of times in the past. I've always been interested in, are we losing market share for our public schools? Where are they going? And this is a step in trying to learn that. So thank you very much for starting to give us some color on this. And it's counter to what I presume we were losing it to private schools, but it seems like we're losing just anecdotally, just the handful that we're looking at. It looks like maybe more to charter schools than not a lot of private school exodus. Do you have, so this, it looks to me like this probably takes a lot of work to dig in to get these by school. I'm guessing you don't have this kind of data for every single school. Is that fair? Because that'd probably take some inordinate, insane amount of work to get by school for all the schools, right?
Yeah, what I actually have to do, I have the transfer out data, but I go through the comments and try to identify where they said, because all of the data clerks are supposed to know anytime a student transfers out where they went or where they received that records request from. So we can make sure that we're staying accountable for all of our students.
Yeah.
And I go through that and I try to identify what type of school that is, if it's out of state, if it's in state, if it's a charter versus a public.
So if you have the data, or if it's obtainable without an inordinate amount of work, I think it would be interesting to see the totals for the, so how much did we lose to charter school? How much did we lose to unknown, which, those people were afraid who are dropping out of education altogether, and how much we're losing to the private schools.
Right. So all this provides for you, though, is the transfers out. It doesn't show you how many we're getting back in.
Fair.
So,
but can we not also determine that based on our own? We know how many new students show up too, don't we?
yes.
Yeah. So
and I'm working on
possible,
getting information about where they come from, but we don't always have that captured in Power School.
Fair. Well, if you have the data on the totals, and I get we're missing the in piece, but it's still, for us trying to understand, because as I've said before, I'm eager to not lose market share, given that the population is growing, and we don't want people leaving the public school system, partly because we want people to support the public school system.
Right. I can take a look at that. I think it would be overwhelming to try to do it by school, because it is digging out in the comments and identifying what type of school type it is line by line per student. So,
got it. So we don't have it for every school. Okay. Now
no, we have the exit codes. We don't have where they went, and the state defines the codes. It's not as detailed as what you're asking for with the charter versus public.
Got it.
It's just in district, out of district.
Got it.
Is that something that you want me to take
No,
a look
I
at?
don't want to. I'm not trying to burden us with a ton of work, or with only some level of utility. I guess knowing how many people go in and out of state. I guess if they transferred in state, we'll know what our net people who've transferred. I'm sorry, is it within state or within our district? I guess if they've left, if we know how many people have transferred who have left but didn't leave the state, I guess but we still don't know if they just left the region, they went to another county nearby, right?
So we have one code for transfer out of district.
Okay.
Whether that's out of country, out of state, or just outside of our county, it's all one code.
And so we're not really going to, even if we had the net of that code, right? That's just going to show us a change. We're not going to really know where they went.
Right.
Right. So we still don't have a great way to gauge our market share, in a sense, other than going through and trying to total up how many people are in the private schools and in the chartered schools and seeing how their population data is changing.
So, Mr. Barowie or Angela, do you want to address some about where students are going?
Mr. Griffin, I can tell you that we do what's called a live in and attend report, and we do that based off of the 45-day data. That can tell you where each geographic broken down in the constituent districts. It will actually let you see every school, and it will let you see who inside of their attendance zone, the number that's attending their school, who inside their attendance zone is attending outside of their zone and where they're going to. The schools would be identified. And it also lets us know who from outside of the county is actually, doesn't tell us, it tells us where they're attending. It's just not coded in a way that we only know a number. We don't know exactly what district they're coming from. It'll just say out of county. That report I actually shared with the board and the constituent boards, and I would be happy to send you that. That is actually posted on the website though, also.
Okay, great. Thank you.
But if I can, let me caveat that it does not show the students in private schools. So we do not know which private school students might be going to, and it does not show non-district charter schools. So we can say that we cannot say that they're even in the zone if they attend one of those two programs, a private school or a non-district charter school. So there is a gap in the overall number of students that live in Charleston County.
Is there a way for, and I'm not trying to figure out exactly which schools people are going to. I'm just trying to figure out which ones we're not getting in by total numbers, right? So it doesn't sound like there's a way for us to get that number or that we know of.
Correct. So if a student starts in one of our schools, there is a chance we could find out by looking at that individual where they're going. But if they don't start in our school, we have no way of even knowing where they are.
But Mr. Griffin, that data is still very interesting, even of internal, because you can actually see the differences of total live-in. You can see what districts and attendance zones are actually decreasing in the total number of live-in students, which ones are increasing. If you follow those patterns, it is a very interesting document to look at from year to year and see those geographic changes and where we may be losing some students.
Thank you. I look forward to looking at that.
And where's this posted?
It is posted, if you go on our website, it's under Operations Division, and it's under the Planning and Real Estate tab, and it goes all the way back to 2017.
Thank you. It was an interesting. There was an interesting statement made about, obviously the 17-year rule, and I don't see listed in this report any way of knowing how many kids are actually taking advantage of that and dropping out of school. Do we have that number?
The grad rate and dropout data is prepared by the Office of Assessment and Evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the ones that track dropouts. We can ask their department if there's something that they can provide about what is recently reported to the state.
I just look at the West Ashley High School, and there seems to be the most movement at that school between charter schools transferred to publics. I'm actually kind of surprised that the transfer out of state county is state and country is so low. when I look at the two schools that you've picked, and this is for the period. So this is the 90-day report.
So yeah, this is transfers out of district between 45 and 90 day. And there is another code. I'm going to look really quick while we're talking. That is for dropouts. But again, my department is not the department that analyzes dropout data. Because there's a process that we follow in the district where we try to trace all of those down. We don't want anybody that, we want to make sure we're accountable for every student and where they've gone.
And what is the final report for the year?
The 135 is our final funding report. That's when the state looks at all of our students and trues up what they've paid us. Is that what you mean?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Yes, that's 135.
135. Well, Milne, I do like this format of this reporting. I do appreciate the in-state transfer and the homeschool, and I am kind of surprised how low the private school transfer at those levels. But then knowing the two schools, it doesn't surprise me. What can you I mean, West Ashley, what charter school would be drawing students from West Ashley?
I can take a look at the detail and get back to you if that is okay.
I appreciate it. It just seems to be a curious number. And then going back to the Meeting Street increase, that was just how do you account for that large of an increase? Was it the combination of the three schools, or was it just that many
Now, remember,
kids?
we had 2 elementary schools in the area that decreased, Cochrane and Lambs.
Okay. Got it.
And I was gonna tell you really quick, there is a different code that is used for dropout data that would not be included in the report that I provided. My report was focusing on transfers.
Any further questions? Hearing none, we'll move on to item 3G, which is the monthly financial update. Ms. Carlin, you're on.
Yes, thank you, sir. So we continue to trend very well, and our projected use of fund balances has dropped down to 4.3 million. And this is because actual revenues are projected to be $6.8 million above budget due to an increase in local as well as state revenues. And our actual expenditures are projected to be $7.6 million under budget. And this is due to savings in salaries and benefits from our current vacancies. So I think we're going to end on a good note.
The 6.8 and above for revenue and 7.6 down in expenses.
Yes.
Any questions from other members of the committee? Well, I know from talking to a lot of teachers that they're signing their contracts, so that's a good sign. I always like hearing that from my friends. So hopefully we'll spend some of that money on some teacher salaries. Moving on to, I guess we're going to convene into executive session for contractual matters. Is that correct? Will that be the next item?
Mr. Grabowski, can I go ahead and answer your question about West Ashley Charter Schools?
Oh, please do.
They're online cyber academies. So online charters.
Oh. That's the which is that the Progress School or the
There's several of them.
Mr. Grabowski, this is Anita Huggins. We've had since COVID, we've had a number of students who have opted to remain virtual. As you may know, we partner with Low Country, the consortium, which services some of our students, and there are other various online opportunities for high school students. I think you see that increase at West Ashley as a result of post-COVID implications for families.
Thank you. Okay. With that being said, Dr. Kinney, I guess we would have, do we need a motion to move into executive session for contractual matters, or just a notification that we will be moving?
Okay, we're all back.
So, Mr. Chairman, if you want, I'll make a recommendation, or I'll have a recommendation to execute the purchase contract as in accordance with the recommendation from staff on that Hershey campus. Or make a motion to that effect.
Second.
Mr. Grabowski, I'm not sure if you realize you're on mute.
There. Can I have a second to the motion? Or do we already have the second?
I thought Thelma seconded it.
Yeah.
Excellent. So let's have a vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes. Mr. Griffin, do you want to make the second motion?
I don't.
Oh, okay, I will. I'd like to make a second motion to approve staff's recommendation as to the allocation of the funds from the real estate sale of Hershey Elementary. Do I have a second?
Second.
Do we have a vote?
Aye.
For
Aye.
the record, I abstained, just for the record.
Fair enough. So we're out of executive session. Both these will be passed on to the board. Do we have any other items for the committee for consideration? So do we want to review what motions are going to be sent forward for action to the board? As I see the list, it's items 2A, the 2023-28 capital program phase 5 long-term debt budget reallocation. Item 2B, which is the fixed cost of FCO for fiscal year 23 budget reallocation. Item C is the 2023-28 capital programs phase 5 sales tax capital maintenance budget reallocation. Item 2D is the approval of projects greater than 250,000. Item 2F, the final agreed upon procedure for 2017-2022 capital programs phase 4 1 cent and sales tax referendum. For information items, we'll have item 3A, which will be fiscal year 21, fiscal year 22 procurement agreed upon procedures, AUP audit reports. Item 3B, Malden and Jenkins procurement and audit and analysis. Item 3C, the IT steering committee quarterly report.
Mr.
Item,
Grabowski, I'm sorry,
yes.
Mr. Grabowski, we don't typically send that to the board.
Okay.
I'm not saying we can't, but just FYI, we don't typically send that.
Okay. I have no problem not sending it to the board. It's going to be a long meeting as it is. So the other 3 information reports, or 4, I think are important, are going to be very short. And that'd be item 3D, which is monthly capital projects report. Item 3E, which is the ESSER updates. Item 3F, which is the 90-day enrollment count. And item 3G is the monthly financial update. And then we have the 2 motions that came out of executive session on the real estate transaction involving Hershey Elementary. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
It sounds good. The next time and date for the next meeting, if I'm looking at my calendar correct, is April 4th at 2 p.m. If that's correct. With that being said, I would say this meeting is adjourned, and I thank everybody very much for their input and the district staff for their work.